The U.S. Department of Energy is cleaning up the Oak Ridge Reservation of residual hazardous and radioactive contamination left over as a result of decades of nuclear energy research. Much of that work has been influenced by the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup operations. You're welcome to attend the meetings and be part of this important work. For more information, call us or visit our website.
Our next meeting will be Wednesday, March 14th, and the presentation topic there is going to be on ongoing efforts to assure waste disposal capacity. Also, please note the slide. It says, please mute or turn off your cell phones, and in case of emergency, you can leave the building through the doors that you entered in, or we have a secondary exit back here. Okay, so we can go ahead and let people know that on the phone we have John Tapp, who's one of our board members, and then also Connie Jones is on the phone. So I'd like to invite our liaisons to give their comments, and we'll start with Dave Adler, who's presumably here for Jay. Thank you.
Jay's been in Knoxville all afternoon for meetings, and I said I'd cover for him tonight. So. Let's see, on the budget front, we're now operating under another continuing resolution. I think as people may be aware, the budget process involves both authorizing and then appropriating budget. We've been appropriated, in effect, given money to run us through sometime in March. It's enough money to keep us operating at about the level we've always operated at. Congress also authorized, and still has to file take additional actions to fund, but has authorized funding caps for the next couple of years at levels that look pretty good for Oak Ridge. Actually set aside significant amounts of money for a lot of the D&D work that we need to get underway at science and defense facilities in Oak Ridge. So far it's looking pretty good. I was asked to give a brief update on the landfill project. Since Brian Henry will be here next month speaking about it in detail, I'll be very short tonight. But basically that project's moving along reasonably well. As you may recall, we completed a dispute resolution agreement with EPA and TDEC, kind of setting ourselves on a common path for moving forward. One of the first things that we've agreed to do together is to craft a proposed plan. That will be the formal public document that we put before the public probably sometime this summer to take formal public comment on a proposal to build a landfill on the Oak Ridge Reservation to allow continuation of the cleanup program. Another component to that agreement was that we would drill a few wells, I can't remember how many, 16 or so wells, in what now appears to be the preferred location for the landfill, pretty much right in the center of Bear Creek Valley. So that was an agreement we made. We've been honoring that agreement. In fact, Brian's already got contractors out there. They've already drilled 3 of the wells, and they will continue to drill the wells so that we can get a lot of data from the wet season this year and understand groundwater behavior at the site better before we actually put that proposed plan out. I think with that, I'll wrap up. You can hand it to EPA or TDEC if they have anything else they want to say.
Okay, let's ask Connie on the phone. Connie, do you have any comments?
No, I don't. Thank you. I think Dave covered the issues that I would have talked about, but I would be happy to try to answer questions if asked.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Krzysztof Sarczkowski?
No comment, other than happy Valentine's Day to everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we have a public comment period. Chloe.
The public comment period is now open. Are there any members of the public who want to comment? As a Citizens Advisory Board to the Department of Energy on environmental cleanup, we want to encourage the community at large to attend and participate in our board and committee meetings. If you are unable to attend, please send in your questions and comments to the address shown. Appropriate comments and questions will be read during the public comment section of the SSAB meeting and will be given the same consideration by the board and DOE as those given in person. Meeting schedules and ways to communicate with the board can be obtained by calling 241-4583 or by visiting our website.
Okay, thank you. So it's actually time to move on to our presentation, which is going to be on excess contaminated facilities. And we have Brian Henry and Bill McMillan here from DOE. Appreciate that, to give us a presentation. And Richard will give us their biographies. And what I would like to ask is, since we have two presenters tonight, let's go ahead and wait till both presenters have finished the presentation before we ask questions. So if you could just jot your questions down and then wait until the entire presentation is done. Appreciate that.
Okay. Brian Henry was named the Y12 Portfolio Federal Project Director in 2016. In this role, he oversees all the planning and execution for Y12's current and upcoming cleanup projects, including all decontamination, demolition, and disposal operations. In this role, he is also leading preparations for the Mercury treatment facility and the environmental management disposal facility, two of OREM's largest and most vital near-term capital projects. Prior to his selection, Henry was EM's senior project manager for the environmental management disposal facility, and he also served as the interim portfolio federal project director for Y12. Before joining EM, Henry served as the chief of the reservation management branch at DOE's Oak Ridge office, and he also led its reindustrialization program. Henry has more than 20 years of federal experience working on complex facility and utility projects, including time he spent as a civilian employee for the Navy and the Air Force. He holds a bachelor's degree in electrical and computer engineering from Tennessee Technology University, and he is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Tennessee. Mr. McMillan, Bill, the co-presenter here is a portfolio federal project director for the Department of Energy Oak Ridge Office of Environmental Management, with the responsibility for overseeing all environmental management cleanup, decontamination, decommissioning, waste storage, and disposal operations at ORNL. Bill has been with DOE for more than 30 years and joined the Oak Ridge Office of Environmental Management in 1995. Since coming into EM, Bill has performed program and project management activities for low-level waste disposition, transuranic waste characterization and disposition of uranium-233, and various remediation and construction activities. Bill's career has also included 5 years with the DOE Y12 National Security Complex Site Office, 3 years with the Savannah River Operations Office, and 5 years with the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. Bill has a Master's of Science degree in Environmental Systems Engineering from Clemson University and a Bachelor of Science degree in Biology from the College of Charleston. He lives in Oak Ridge with his wife, Kathy, and has 2 grown sons.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Belinda. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the background on our excess contaminated facilities risk reduction effort, and then I'll talk about what's going on at the Y12 facilities, and then Bill will pick up and give you details on what's happening at the ORNL facilities. All right, so the next slide. So a lot of you are familiar with the Oak Ridge Reservation, and I always loved your back wall back there that does a really good job of showing the reservation and the different sites. As many of you know, we have the Oak Ridge Reservation is about 34,000 acres, and we have 3 primary sites: the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the Y12 National Security Complex, and the East Tennessee Technology Park. So I'm going to talk about 3 different types of risk, and these risks are really present at all 3 sites. But when I'm talking in terms of these, it's the primary driver for that particular site, although all of them have some component of all of these risks at the site. So for the East Tennessee Technology Park, that's one that EM owns all the facilities, all the utilities, all the services out at that location. And so one of our primary drivers out there is the life cycle risk. You know, the sooner we get through with cleanup out there, the sooner we can offload a lot of those costs that we refer to kind of as a hotel load, because there's a significant cost just associated with being out there on site, operating the utilities systems and the infrastructure. So the primary driver left out at the East Tennessee Technology Park is the life cycle risk. The Vision 2020 has us finishing cleanup out there in 2020, which is getting pretty close. So at Y12, the primary risk that drives that is the environmental risk. I think most of you are familiar that, you know, a lot of mercury was used out at that location, and we have a mercury challenge with mercury in the sediments in the building and cleanup. And why that's important is, you know, that does feed into the Upper East Fort Poplar Creek, which eventually exits the site into the city in East Fort Poplar Creek. And so one of our primary challenges is reducing the mercury that's leaving in that stream. And there have been a lot of actions over the years to continue to address mercury reduction out there. At the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, one of our challenges there, which is also a challenge at Y12, is we have a cleanup mission right alongside an ongoing high priority national mission facilities. And so, you know, getting the cleanup done to facilitate the mission is important at both of those 2 sites. Out at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the primary risk is associated with radiological contamination, because you have some excess contaminated facilities with radiological contamination right next to some highly modern user science facilities. And Bill will give you more detail on that. I did mention 34,000 acres on the Oak Ridge Reservation. Y12 in particular does have close proximity to residents. I think the closest resident to Y12 was within a half a mile. Next slide. So, you know, starting in 2015, and I'll talk a little more about that in a minute, there was really a lot of attention starting to be paid on excess contaminated facilities throughout the DOE complex. And what those conversations resulted in is Congress providing money specific to addressing risk at these excess contaminated facilities. And FY16, we were fortunate enough to get $28 million that was dedicated to addressing risk at those facilities, both at ORNL and Y12. In FY17, we got $45 million to continue that work. The FY18 appropriation is not yet final, as David mentioned, although the continuing resolutions basically are funding us at the FY17 amount. So we have some additional funds there to continue the work to reduce risk at the excess contaminated facilities at both ORNL and Y12. And the picture there is the biology complex, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. Next slide. So I mentioned that in 2015 is when a lot of this really garnered a lot of attention, and DOE headquarters established a team called the Excess Contaminated Facilities Working Group. And as you can see from the slide, across the DOE complex, there's about 1,600 facilities that fall into the excess contaminated facilities list. And addressing all of those will cost, I mean, if we had the funds to D&D those today, that's about a $6 billion effort. And of course, we don't have the funds available to D&D all of those facilities, so the money we are getting targeted is prioritizing risk reduction at those facilities and starting tackling that challenge sooner rather than later. And we'll get to the details in just a minute. So out of that was also a required report to Congress, and in 2017, the Excess Contaminated Facilities Working Group provided a report to Congress, talking about what DOE was going to do to start addressing this risk. And in that, there was a recommendation, and it actually made it in the President's budget, $225 million to address the high-risk excess contaminated facilities at Y12 and the, it's not Los Alamos, the LA&L, I think it's out in California, Livermore, Lawrence Livermore, right, facility. So, here in Oak Ridge, we, across the complex, there are about 1,600 facilities, but Oak Ridge has about 25% of all of the excess contaminated facilities that the DOE complex owns and maintains. So they put some money toward it in the President's budget. The money we actually will see comes as a result of the appropriations process, and the House and the Senate's weigh in, and what we actually get is dependent on that process, which hasn't been completed for FY18. But we're optimistic that there's significant amounts of money available to continue to address excess contaminated facilities at both Y12 and ORNL. The other thing they looked at is making sure we're doing a better job of reporting on the challenge that DOE faces with excess contaminated facilities. And they also started looking at potentially some technology development needs to ensure that when we're trying to tackle this huge liability, we can do so a little more efficiently and effectively. So there's some TD funds going out to look at the various methods that can be used to address the hazards in these facilities. Next slide. So now I'm going to get a little more specific about the Y12 facilities. This map up here, everything in red is on that excess contaminated facilities list that's out there. What's in yellow are the facilities where we focused our FY16, FY17, and FY18 efforts to reduce our major risk and our highest priority risk at Y12. And that's the, I have a pointer, so that's not very effective. So let's go to this. So that's Alpha 4. So I'll talk about Alpha 4 and also the Colex equipment at Alpha 4. And then this is the biology complex, which actually has seven different facilities, and I'll talk a little bit more about those as well. We're here to talk about the money that OREM received to address excess contaminated facilities and risk reduction activities, but also Y12 received some money, and they put some effort in FY17 toward reducing risk at some of the excess contaminated facilities that Y12 owns. Next slide. Okay, Alpha 4. So Y12 is a multi-program site. So EM owns a few facilities out there. The majority of the facilities are owned by the National Nuclear Security Administration, and then there are some buildings owned by Science, and there's actually one building out there owned by Nuclear Energy. So it's, when we were deciding where we needed to put our money and start addressing the reducing the excess contaminated facilities risk, OREM worked closely with Y12 and the Oak Ridge National Laboratory so that we could get a shared priority and prioritize the facilities that were important to all of the programs and all of DOE. So Alpha 4, this is about a 500,000 square foot facility. It has been sitting idle for about 25 years. Some of the first money that we used in FY16 was to go in and do some roof repairs. What we've learned from the different sites is one of our biggest enemies toward future cleanup is the infiltration of rainwater into these facilities. So keeping the roofs repaired and limiting the intrusion of that rainwater into the facilities is very important. So we spent some money to do some roof repairs in Alpha 4. Those were completed in FY17. Next slide. So one of the efforts we started in FY16 that we started in FY17 and are continuing into FY18 is removal of mercury and removal of the contaminated equipment on the west side of the Alpha 4 building. This equipment was used as part of the process to separate lithium isotopes. For for overall at Y12, there was about 20 million pounds of mercury used. It's thought that about 700,000 pounds were lost to the environment and are part of the cleanup that we have in front of us. We have removed to date more than 2 tons of mercury from this equipment. And part of our effort started with cleaning up and if you can see, let's see. You know, all of this equipment is exterior to the building and it's sitting on concrete pads. So one of the first things we did is went in and cleaned up all the grit from those concrete pads, and then we sealed that so that if we had any mercury spills when we were doing the removal of the equipment, it would be contained. I think we removed 20 to 30 drums of grit that had a mercury contamination that has to be sent off for treatment. We expect to finish this work late this summer, and then we're going to move over and start some work on the east side. We have Colex equipment on the east side too. There's a small amount of Colex equipment on the south side. Our initial results from the characterization and looking at that is we don't think that has little to any mercury, so our focus is going to be on the east side. We've learned a tremendous amount in the efforts to on this project for removal of the Colex equipment. Mercury vapors, when we're going in and cleaning out the sediment and the gunk, the mercury provides a challenge to our workers because we have to limit their exposure to mercury vapors. We are finding a lot more mercury in the process equipment than we believed existed because all of these systems were, you know, the low spots and these systems were drained years ago. But we found a tremendous amount of mercury. We also found inside the pipes a lot of scale that is basically holding up some of the mercury. So as we're going through there, it's a lot more intensive than we originally envisioned to go in and get all that mercury. All of the piping and equipment that's contaminated with mercury is being shipped off-site for treatment and disposal. On the east side, we're looking at the lessons learned from the west side, and we're going to do some demonstration techniques to go in and see if there's a more effective way to remove the mercury from inside the pipes. We have a couple mechanical means that we're going to try. We may try some chemical means like flushing so that we can be more cost effective and also reduce the exposure to the workers. So that'll be work that we're starting up in late fiscal year 18 as well. Next slide. So on the biology, with FY17 funds, for the biology complex, we went out and did the characterization of the entire complex so that we could understand the hazards and get in place the waste handling plans with the regulators. We completed that work in the spring of 2017. Based on the funding that we're seeing, we believe that we can get started on large-scale pre-demolition activities for building 9207 that you see in the background. It is the largest of the remaining buildings at the biology complex. It's about 250,000 square feet. And we intend to get that work, or we believe we'll have that work under contract here in the near term to do pre-demolition activities. Next slide. So if you ever heard anyone mention the Mouse House, that's building 9210. I should mention for all of these facilities out at Y12, or I would at least say the majority of the facilities out at Y12 that we're talking about, they all were involved early in their life cycle with some type of uranium salvage or uranium processes, and then several of them matured or evolved to different missions, and that was the case out here. So there were some early uranium operations, but primarily it was used for genetics research and biological research related to RADs, my understanding. 9210 is the second of the largest building. It's about 64,000 square feet, and we hope if the funding that Dave talked about, you know, if the appropriations follows the authorizations, we believe there'll be money to address the entire biology complex and potentially have all of that D&D complete by the 2021 time frame. So we're making plans to do that. Next slide. So there are 2 small buildings associated with the biology complex. This one and this one right here is called the Pigeon Quarters. It's a small facility that had degraded to the point that the roof is collapsing. And so when we were doing the characterization for the biology complex, we could not enter that facility. We actually have under contract now with a small business an effort to basically demolish the Pigeon Quarters this spring, and also another building I'll show you in just a second, which is the Radiological source shed facility. The plan for the Pigeon Quarters is we'll have to basically demolish it to the ground, and then we'll have to go in and do the characterization. We do not believe, based on process knowledge, that there's any radiological contamination, but the characterization will confirm that. Next slide. There are a couple of smaller buildings that have separate facility numbers, but these are basically attachments to 9207, and they're mechanical electrical annexes to 9207. So those will be part of the pre-demolition effort that will start this year. And I think that's it for me. Next slide. Oh, one more picture. 9770-2. It's in between 9210 and 9207, and the picture there is the workers going in and doing characterization in that facility when we completed our characterization effort. Next slide. Now I'm going to turn it over to Bill.
So I'm going to talk about the activities that have gone on in the last couple of years at OR&L, and then I've got a concluding slide of what we're planning to do starting next year, assuming the funding comes through to support it. So at OR&L, similar to the Y12 slide, we have an overview here that shows the red buildings as all the excess facilities, and it's kind of difficult to see just because the scale is so broad, so we could pick up both valleys. We've got Bethel Valley over here and Melton Valley in the background. But we've got some yellow buildings here that are the focus of our excess facility funding work in both of the valleys. I'll talk about 3028 and 3029. There were a couple of isotopes labs that we've done some fogging in. Building 3026 is the leftovers from an earlier D&D activity that still has a couple of hot cells on the site, and we've done some work to help stabilize those hot cells. Building 3517, I'll talk about that we did some HEPA filter replacement work because those HEPA filters were becoming, starting to show signs of age and plugging. Building 75, most of the work in 75 has been in 7500. We did a lot of asbestos work in there, cleanup of asbestos and removal of combustible materials. And in 7503, the MSRE facility, that's the molten salt reactor facility. We conducted an engineering evaluation to understand our risk in that facility. And as I'll talk about in some of our next year's work, there's some follow-on activities to start addressing some of those risks. Next slide. So starting with building 3026, this is a building that used to be, it was a pretty large building that was involved in barium-140 criticality testing back in the day when it was operated from 43 to 90. Few years back in the Recovery Act periods, around 2010, there was the wooden building structure of this building was taken down. The intent at that time was to do complete D&D of the building, but they ran into some excess problems and surprises as they started tackling the activities in these hot cell facilities that you see right here is one, and the top of one is right here. That caused the work to be suspended at that time to go back and do some replanning, and it was going to cost more money than we had obligated for it at that time. So the current activities with excess facility is to basically try to stabilize these facilities, put them in a little better condition to last a few more years until we can get in there and do the D&D to complete the D&D activities. This is a Category 3, has been downgraded from Category 3 to a radiological, which means that the inventory has been reduced such that it doesn't require a lot of nuclear safety controls to operate it. It's mainly in an S&M, surveillance and maintenance mode now. So some of the specific activities we did is on the top of this hot cell structure, this is the A and B hot cells that were at the site. We had a wind enclosure that was used up there when they were doing the Recovery Act work. They had removed the hot cell plug, which you see a photo here of the hot cell plug had been removed, and the wind enclosure was the structure that was around that to protect to contain any contamination within it. So once that work was completed, the plugs were put back in. The wind enclosure was a temporary facility, so we wanted to make that a little bit more stable. So we demolished the wind enclosure, and then it's kind of difficult to see in the picture, but if you can see right in there, you can see a white layer. That's a new membrane that was constructed to form a better waterproofing roof across the top of the hot cells. So we put that on to try to seal those hot cells to prevent water intrusion from going in through the roof plugs. Another thing we did was associated with this tunnel. There's an interconnecting tunnel that goes between the A and B hot cells, and this one that's kind of difficult to see, but this is another hot cell type of facility. It was called the Soaring and Segregation cells. There's a tunnel, below ground tunnel, that connects this structure with the A and B hot cells in the back. And this is a photo of the inside of that tunnel. It had accumulated enough water over the years, primarily we believe from rainwater infiltration, possibly a little bit of groundwater in seepage as well. So we pumped the water out of that tunnel, and we've installed better monitoring equipment in that tunnel to watch the water levels and periodically pump them out. So the camera system that's in there and this scale that makes the water level easy to read has been installed, so we can do a better job of monitoring that. And then when it reaches some high levels, we'll pump it out occasionally to treatment. The accumulation rates has kind of surprised us of the water that returns into that tunnel. It's a lot less than what we thought it was, and it could be because we put a better roof structure over the hot cells, which we think was a major source of the input into that tunnel. But it's accumulated about 15 inches since we pumped it out over a year ago, and so the accumulation rate is very slow. The other thing we did at the pad was stabilize a couple of concrete pedestals. We did in the Recovery Act, there were hot cell structures on top of each one of these that were demolished back in Recovery Act days. There was the concrete associated with those hot cell foundations was pretty well chipped up and had some residual contamination with it. So we wanted to stabilize that to make sure that there's a good concrete cover and cap on that to contain any fragments of concrete that might carry some contamination off onto the surrounding building pad. So that was completed. You see the photo there has the wooden framework around that that was used when we were pouring the concrete to cover those pedestals up. Next slide. So another bit of work was associated with hot cells in building 3028 and adjacent building 3029. These hot cells were left over from, it's in an area of the plant we call Isotope Row. There's a series of hot cell and isotope production facilities all in a common area there along Isotope Row. These two facilities have hot cells that have residual contamination in them that we wanted to isolate and fix, so we protect it from any airborne migration out. That assists the S&M functions of the buildings, and when we do get into D&D, it's an activity that would have had to been done to make sure that when we enter those hot cells, we don't have a spread of contamination. So this facility, 3028, was primarily involved in iodine 131 processing, and then a little bit of work with promethium 147. It was shut down back in '85, so it's been shut down for 30 plus years. and we wanted to immobilize the contamination of those hot cells. So you can see how the hot cells look inside. When I got to the next slide on 3029, I've got some photos of them actually putting the fog in hot cells, but they did the same thing in this picture, or in this facility as well. Fogging was completed in these cells in both buildings just a few weeks ago, and confirming samples were done to make sure the goals of one DAC were reached for the fogging activities. Go ahead and put the next slide up there. This is 3029, similar facility. It's right across the little roadway, alleyway between 3028 and 29. And this shows some of the activities of the workers inserting equipment in through one of the ports of the hot cell to blow the fog in. You can see that as well in this tube right here that's inserted through one of the portals into the hot cell to fog it. So the way it works is once you fog it, you allow the fog to set and dry, and then we go in and take swipe samples of the walls. And I think in one of those was it 3028, Clint, that we had to actually put several coats of fixative in it before we met our goals. Next slide. Building 3517 is one of the major facilities at the site. You see the picture of the building in the lower right of the photo. This is the one where it's in a standby condition, but we have noticed the differential pressures across the HEPA air filters that are used to provide the building airflow through that building was starting to increase, indicating the filters have aged to their lifespan. The filters, I think, had been changed in about 10 years, which is kind of where you starting to see effects of filters becoming plugged. And so we needed to go in and do the job to replace those HEPA filters. So you see the work going on. The filter houses are outside. They're actually on the far end of the building on the other side over there. But the workers out doing the work. I think this was done in December of last year. One of the pictures here shows one of the HEPA filter banks coming out. It's either coming out or going in. I can't tell with that picture, but it looks pretty clean, so it's probably a new one going in. But there was several banks like that were removed and packaged up for waste disposal and replaced with new filters. So that supports the continuing ventilation needs for the building and addresses a risk of the filters becoming plugged and contamination potentially leaking out. Next slide. Building 7500, this is the building. You can see the conditions in the building prior to doing any work. This is the old homogeneous reactor experiment building. It was a nuclear safety pilot project back in the days that it operated in the 50s to the early 60s when it was shut down. A good bit of water leakage into the building that was causing a lot of mold, and the building asbestos layers were falling off and ceiling tiles were falling and so forth. And that really prevented easy access into the building to maintain the surveillance and maintenance functions in the building. So this was one of the higher priorities for us to go in and do the remediation. It started out, I think, in the early part of fiscal year 16 with going in and removing the combustible materials so that we could to eliminate the fire protection, some of the fire protection requirements in that building. And then once that was conducted, we implemented the work to remove a lot of the asbestos in piping and wall board and ceiling tiles and so forth to stabilize that building. See some of the work going on here. I don't think I have a photo of the finished product, but if any of you go on the tour, we'll be able to look in and see a lot cleaner floor space and so forth in that building. And that allows now workers to be able to go in there with minimal PPE compared to what they were having to do before. Next slide. Molten salt reactor experiment. This is probably, of all the buildings that are excess facility, this one's probably closer to an operational facility than any of them we have besides the wastewater treatment facilities out there. And that's primarily due to these fuel, salt, and drain tanks that we have in the center of the building associated with the old reactor process. There's salt fuel that has been defueled that remains in these tanks. It generates a very hazardous hydrofluoric acid gas that we have to pump down every 6 months or so to assure that the pressures don't build up to something that violates our safety requirements. So that building, being the operational building that it is, we used excess facility dollars to go in and really do a good engineering evaluation in that building to identify what risks we have and where we should apply efforts to reduce those risks. And some of the things that came out of that was some electrical system deficiencies that we've identified as a need to assure the ventilation system remains functional and has good supply of primary power plus backup power. And then efforts to engineer a new method of ventilation of these tanks is important to us as well, to put those on a continuous ventilation so that we don't have to worry about the buildup over time of pressures in those tanks. What you see in the photos, this is part of this is a glove box as part of the reactive gas removal system, which is the system that we use for pumping down the MSRE gases in the tanks. This looks like waste containers. Clint, do you know what that really is? Introduce Clint Morey, by the way. He's my counterpart with UCOR.
That was waste from the high bay.
From the high bay. So that's a waste disposal effort. We've got ongoing waste disposal going on in that facility as well. Next slide. So what we're planning to do, as soon as we get some funds from the congressional appropriations in 2018, is we have plans on the book to provide that electrical power back up. We're calling it a layup approach. What we intend to do is to provide reliable power to all the critical systems in the facility, and then those systems that are not as critical, we plan to relocate the people out of that building and go basically minimal S&M on that facility once we get the ventilation systems for the tanks taken care of. So we'll be, once we get the upgrades to the electrical equipment that drives all the critical ventilation systems and electrical systems that are associated with the critical systems in there, then we'll move the people out, house them somewhere else, and we'll go to a minimal S&M function at MSRE. Liquid gaseous waste operations, there is in the Bethel Valley storage tank area, there's some tanks that have accumulated sludge from the evaporator over the years. We occasionally have to pump those tanks out. There are pumps associated with those transfers called Moino pumps. Moino is a trade name. And there's 2 pumps in a pump vault. One of those pumps has failed. So we need to get into the pump vault to replace the Moino, to upgrade those pumps. On top of the pump vault is a bunch of surplus equipment that was used back in the early 2000s or late 1990s. The last time we moved sludge, we did an experiment with pulse jet system to move those sludge transfers. And so that equipment has to be removed from the top so we can access the pump vault and replace the Moino pumps. So we're targeting, since we have a high rate of risk with, if the single Moino pump were to fail for some reason on its occasional use, we need to make sure we go in and take care of those pumps and provide the backups. So that's a targeted opportunity for excess facility dollars. And then also with liquid gaseous waste operations, we've done a couple of engineering evaluations over the past couple of years and identified some improvements to make with LGWO operations. to allow us to consolidate operations up at Building 3608, which is the newer half of the facility. But we have not done a lot of looking at the underground piping and what we may need to do in terms of replacing piping. So we want to do another engineering evaluation, we're calling it Phase 3, to take a look at the underground piping systems and further on facility electrical and feed systems for the evaporator to determine if there's some risk there that we need to take care of as well. So that's kind of where we have some targeted funds. I think the estimated cost for those 3 activities is about $10 million in total that would be used to fund some of those activities over the next year or two. And I think that's the last slide. Go ahead and flip it. Yep. So I guess Brian can stand back up and answer questions.
Well, thank you very much, Brian and Bill. So I'd like to go ahead and open up for questions from board members. We'll start over here with Fred. Thank you.
Could you provide a few specifics on the process for fogging the hot cells? What exactly are you doing and what are you using?
So the fog that's used, I think, is called a product called CC Fix.
That's correct.
And it's been used a lot for fixing contamination in hot cells. We used it out at TWPC when we needed to make hot cell entries over there. But basically, this CC Fix is sprayed in through a fogging machine through the hoses that I had in the pictures, and creates a mist, a very fine mist that floats through the air in the hot cell and coats all the walls and the equipment that it's exposed to. And so once that's done, then it's allowed to dry basically and seal itself like hairspray basically on the wall.
Thank you.
Okay, Ed, you're up.
Thanks very much for the presentation.
Sure.
Kind of getting up a little higher as far as vision. The pre-remediation activities is what I call them. It's what's going on now, right? With the excess facilities out of RNL and also Y12.
It's not the what we call decommissioning activities, where we remove source material and we get the facilities cleaned out to support D&D. These are more activities necessary to allow us to continue a surveillance and maintenance function, not trying to do the big work to get ready for D&D. It's just stabilizing for safety.
I guess my point was that as these activities go on now, will go in the next 1-2 years, the actual decommissioning, as you call it, is there a more fixed target as far as time goes for these facilities? Are they part of a Vision XXX? Or are they shifting too?
The life cycle baseline that we keep, and I think Alan Stokes will be coming in a few weeks to talk about the baseline, has an overall life cycle schedule for when we tackle the decommissioning and demolition activities for all of our facilities. That hasn't changed. I think for ORNL, most of that work begins in the mid-2020s. At Y12, it's a little sooner than that.
Yeah, I think we've been fortunate with the plus-ups that we've been seeing over the last few years and potentially some really good news in 18 and 19, such that some facilities that were pretty far out in the baseline are being pulled in. For example, the biology complex, if you went back 3 years ago, was probably way out, potentially even in the 2030s or 2040s. And based on conversations and risk and priorities among the programs, we've now pulled that in and expect to get it completed by 2021. So I think the more that the plus-ups continue, the sooner that we are able to get to the actual D&D of these facilities.
I guess it's a good thing to do this because it kind of tends to let the regulators and the politicians know that you could finish up sooner.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Okay, I get to call on myself. the two slides that you had that indicated the excess contaminated facilities and the ones that you have work underway. So that was, I guess, slide 5 and 13. Obviously, the facilities that we actually have something underway on are a small number in comparison to. There's an awful lot of orange on these things and not that much yellow. So, could you, other than, you putting together a list that says these are the higher risk facilities and you want to deal with those first, is there some consideration given to demolishing? I mean, I'm looking particularly on the ORNL facility. There's a lot of that are in particularly this one area. Is there any consideration given to, well, if we get rid of those facilities, then we can put something else there and enhance the lab's capabilities and look to an economic development associated with that? Does that taken into consideration when you're looking at what you're going to demolish and when?
Yeah, the overall portfolio plan and the life cycle baseline has some priorities on how we go about and when we go about tackling each one of these facilities, and one of those factors is laboratory needs and goals for mission. Most of this central campus, we call this the central campus area. The lab's development activities right now are focused primarily to the east of that, as you've seen the new structures they've built out there. They are now starting to focus some in the 7,000 area, which is even further to the east, on modernizing there. And then they've done some development immediately to the right side of the picture in your photo on the west side. That's kind of the biology area over there. So that's kind of where their mission areas are focused at the moment, awaiting us to do the cleanup. Now, they are interested in having additional footprint here there in Central Campus when we're done with the remediation activities. The way we focused the work on the excess facilities, there was a lot of work done to evaluate all the facilities and where the risks are. And there's a lot of red buildings there. Some of them are excess in terms of long-term D&D. But, for example, I noticed the stack system is an operational facility, and it's shown as excess, but there are actually some operations there. And many of these facilities do not have the risks that we have identified in these other facilities that we are doing. So there was an effort to go in early on and do enough walkthrough and evaluation of those facilities with what's known about them to identify where the high priority risks are. And so that's what we went to tackle first.
So a couple of things I would offer for Y12, because I think your point is a very good one. When a specific future mission need is identified at one of these locations, I think that goes a long way to ensuring we get funds to take the buildings that are in the way down. An example of that is at Y12 in the biology complex, because NNSA has identified a future mission need for that complex, and so I think that's important. The other thing I would add on the Y12 slide is we only colored in yellow where OREM has excess facilities risk reduction activities. Y12, as I mentioned, is also getting funds, and Y12 has undertaken some legacy material removal efforts in both Alpha 5 and Beta 4. So, those also could be considered yellow because they have active risk reduction activities going on, but those aren't OREMs.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Ned.
In Y12, the fact that some of these facilities belong to or are within the EM program and some are still owned by NNSA, is there an idea of sort of putting together something as one, or because the funding from NNSA may be different from EM as well, right? As far as obtaining the funding and the amount of the funding.
So we routinely meet with the different programs, both science and NNSA, to make sure that we have a coordinated effort on prioritization of all of these facilities. And as we update our life cycle baseline, those conversations occur as we get the funding identified for each fiscal year we continue to revisit that and make sure that we're targeting the right priorities for all three programs.
So in your view, is the urgency of obtaining funds similar from both programs? I mean, is one more urgent than the other, or have you noticed any difference?
I think, currently we're seeing, it appears from the budgets that are coming out, there's a significant potential increase on the NNSA side and some of their work. And that may translate into the ability to get some of those buildings emptied and turned over for D&D sooner. But that, until they actually get the budgets enacted, that's when we can make concrete plans.
I guess also, when the construction of the Mercury treatment facility is completed, things will fall faster, I guess, right? As far as decommissioning and all that.
Well, I think our approach on getting the Outfall 200 Mercury treatment facility in place is to ensure that we don't delay any of that cleanup. That's absolutely correct. But, the timing that we have now works well, and there's plenty of cushion there to get it in place and operational before we actually start demolishing the buildings on the west end.
Thanks so much.
Okay, go ahead, Christoph.
I would like to express appreciation to the federal portfolio DOE directors, appreciation to the complexity and scope of the work they have to deal with. One of the things that I noticed in the presentation here could give you a wrong impression here. I agree that the Excess Contamination Facilities Working Group was established in 2015. However, early in 90s, there was the awareness that there were facilities without a mission, orphan facilities without the owner, without the landlord, facilities that were not in the EM program. There was no funding. Oak Ridge EM program had to compete for funding with other DOE sites. So what EM is dealing right now is with the facilities on which you have a deferred maintenance, facilities that were not deactivated. You have facilities that have a lot of waste and material stored in it, and facilities on which the roofs are leaking and they are in a risk of collapsing. So the decision metrics, trying to decide which facility to demolish, which facility to maintain, because it's going to be higher potential for environmental releases, are the very hard decisions, and these gentlemen have to deal with it on a daily basis.
Okay. Well, thank you for that comment. Are there any other questions from the table? Okay, I want to go ahead and ask John Tapp on the phone. Do you have any questions? I don't hear anything from him. Connie, any comments from you?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In that case, I would open up the questions to members of the public. Does anyone have a question they would like to offer to the group? No one leaps to the microphone. Okay, I think we're done on that. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
It's good to be here.
The U.S. Department of Energy's Oak Ridge Reservation is the site of a vital national defense facility and a modern computational and scientific center. But over the years, parts of the reservation have been contaminated with radioactive and other hazardous waste. DOE has been busy cleaning up those affected areas, but much remains to be done. Citizen input is a valuable part of that effort, and DOE welcomes advice from the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup of the Oak Ridge Reservation. The board provides input on a wide range of environmental cleanup operations underway at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Y-12 National Security Complex, and the East Tennessee Technology Park. You can be part of this important work by attending the monthly meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. For more information, call or visit our website.